Hello, everybody. This is Food Entrepreneurs Well Fed. I'm here with Sam Kressler, and Sam is the owner of Stir Innovation, a culinary-driven, sustainably centered consumer packaged good consulting firm that guides natural products companies from ideation through scale-up to steady-state production. And before we dive into the conversation today, I'd like to give a quick shout to our sponsor, Applied Food Sciences. Applied Food Sciences is a leading supplier of innovative functional ingredients for the natural products industry. Their range of specialty extracts features organic caffeine, plant-based protein, functional mushrooms, and organic vitamin C, designed to work seamlessly in product formulations and clinically studied to enhance functionality. Applied Food Sciences is dedicated to responsibly sourcing its ingredients and providing complete transparency from farm to label, earning the trust and loyalty of the world's largest brands. Learn more about Applied Food Sciences at appliedfoods.com. That's appliedfoods.com. And I'm Monica Watrous. I'm the managing editor of Food Business News and Food Entrepreneur. And Sam, we got a lot of ground to cover today. So let's get into it. First, I'm going to ask you to tell us more about who you are and what Stir Innovation is.
Sure. So as you mentioned, my name is Sam Kressler. I'm the principal of Stir Innovation. So we are, again, you said it pretty well. I'll say it again. We're a full service flavor first, sustainably focused product development and innovation shop. So really we touch every aspect of the ops side of innovation, from blue skying and ideation through benchtop, supply chain build out, co-man search, liaison with contract manufacturers, scale up, trialing, production, stage gate, whatever people need on that side. We're based in Boulder and have been around since 2018. So to kind of get back a bit, I got into the food world as a finance casualty. I was at a hedge fund in 2009. By the end of 2009, I guess it was 2008, magically I was no longer a hedge fund analyst. Realized that I, after meeting with a very talented hypnotist, realized that food was what I loved, and wound up going to culinary school, then got my master's in food systems from NYU. So really focusing on food as the intersection of the healthcare, energy, and environmental crises. Understanding how food gets from the ground to the plate at a macro level. Wound up doing recipe development and chefing and cooking and stuff like that in New York and in San Francisco for a while, and then wound up moving into CPG, first with a company called Boulder Brands. And then when they got bought by Pinnacle Foods, I was with Pinnacle Foods for a few years and overseeing all the commercialization projects for Udi's, Evil, and Glutino. Wound up starting Stir as a result of a round of layoffs, and haven't looked back. So I come to product development. My team comes to product development. We're food scientists, but really we have a culinary perspective and a culinary sensibility. So it needs to run, we need to make money at it, it needs to be able to scale, but it also needs to taste delicious. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your claims are, how good your label is. If it tastes like garbage, no one's going to buy it twice. Right. And that's really where we ground ourselves. Obviously, we also focus exclusively on the natural food and beverage space. So for unsurprisingly, given my kind of sustainability background, that's become pretty paramount for me. If I'm going to be involved in the food system, then I feel that I have an obligation to help improve it.
Sure. Yeah, so you have a lot of varied experience and expertise and perspective and sort of this amazing holistic view of the food system, coming from all angles. And so from that lens, what would you say are the food system's biggest challenges?
Man, So I've been thinking about this, and like it's like, how deep do we want to go? And I figured I might as not like I'm just gonna start at the top, and like because it all kind of cascades down from there. And I mean the so I will preface this by saying I love the USDA. I think that they produce great research, great analysis. I'm a big fan. I think that the FDA does important work. Um, and the biggest kind of the root, I think, of a lot of this, and we'll kind of get around to, how brands can kind of help impact this. But the biggest issue, I think, is the revolving door between industry and government at the USDA. And what I mean is you have folks from the largest agri-food companies or agribusiness companies. They work at a mid-senior level in their company. Then they go over to the USDA or to the FDA. They regulate and create regulations that are most beneficial for their former employers. It's kind of like lobbying from the inside. And then they go back and they get hired by those same companies at a higher level. And they keep on doing it back and forth. That's the revolving door. So what you have is industry serving as the regulator under the guise of neutral regulation, which winds up creating huge conflicts of interest that are great for the businesses that have their inside people, but terrible for consumers. And I don't necessarily even mean at the just at the cash register. I mean also just from a health standpoint for all of us in terms of air quality, water quality, food quality, animal welfare. All of these things um, all these things get tied up in that regulatory revolving door, and that kind of feeds into the Farm Bill, right? And the Farm Bill, which it's this omnibus spending bill, billions and billions of dollars, that comes up in theory every, I believe it's 5 or 6 years. And what you have is, again, competing forces. So you have the USDA regulates agriculture, and they also regulate SNAP and the food-based welfare programs in this country. And in a lot of ways, those are at loggerheads with each other because the USDA's job is to promote U.S. Agricultural interests, right? It's part of the mandate of the organization. But at the same time, when you have both this revolving door and very strong lobbying from the ag industry, but also the oil industry who create the inputs for this for ag, right? You have priorities that are a bit out of whack with what actual humans and citizens want and need, right? So the interests of rural populations, when we're talking about food and ag, diverge oftentimes from that of urban populations, right? Urban centers need food. It's those rural populations that are growing that food, and because of various incentivizations, we have an over-reliance on a very small amount of crops that are not really good for us or for the animals that eat them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of I'd say the largest issue. And just to help people listening to this sort of think about it and put it into perspective, right? I love using the concept of the 99-cent McDonald's hamburger.
Okay.
That does not cost 99 cents, right? Like it costs the consumer 99 cents, but the consumer isn't thinking about the negative externalities. So the externalities are costs that have been socialized, costs borne by the public, but that are but that can be, in this case, reaped as private profits, right? So that 99-cent hamburger doesn't take into account the fact that there's too much pesticide, herbicide, fertilizer being applied to the crops, the corn that grows the corn and soy that feeds the cows, right? That become that burger. All that runs off into the Mississippi River, goes into the Gulf of Mexico, and anyone can go to Google Maps and see this right now. There's a huge, what they call a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which has excess. It has no oxygen in it, or a lack of oxygen in it, which causes algal blooms. It causes all the wildlife to die off, right? And it pollutes the water in there. So if you're eating Gulf shrimp, it means you're eating Gulf shrimp that have been kissed with fertilizer, right? Which doesn't really feel appetizing to me, and it hurts the economies that are dependent on that part, that part of the that part of the water in the country. But then also you have the pollution that's caused, the air pollution, or that's caused by those cows that are in such close proximity, right, from the waste. The amount of manure that comes off of those feedlots is the equivalent of large cities in the United States. The difference is in the large cities we have sewage treatment, right, and there's mandates around that. Those farms don't require the level of sewage treatment that we do, so it also festers, again, seeps into groundwater, causes as someone who lives in Colorado, I can tell you that, and I grew up in the Northeast, so I remember this very, very clear smell. Like before it snowed, there was this like really amazing, crisp, clean smell, and you just knew that like, oh, snow is coming. Where I am now, I can tell that there's going to be snow because it smells like manure, and it smells like manure because outside of Greeley, there's a huge there are a number of very large meat processing facilities. And so you have tens and tens of thousands of cows and pigs. And so that manure cloud, it gets picked up and brought over along the Front Range. So now, and does that directly impact my health? I don't know. Probably not. It's probably just a bad smell. But like, right. It's indicative of it can't be good for the surrounding areas, right? Mm-hmm. So I think maybe that's probably, is that enough?
I don't know. I mean, how much time do you have?
Got plenty. And sorry. So let me just put a point on it for you. So now we go back to that hamburger, right? Just to bring it back. So now when we're talking about that hamburger, we're saying we're not accounting for the water pollution. We're not accounting for the fossil fuel use. We're not accounting for the health issues that are associated by the public healthcare system, right? And for diet and health related diseases, right, that are caused by this kind of eating. And so really, when you take all of that away, or you add all that in, that the cost of that hamburger is much, much more expensive, right, than what you see at the cash register.
Yeah. Well, now that we're all thoroughly depressed, what are some of the implications, or like what could happen, and what can the industry do to absolve some of these complications from production?
Yeah. So I want to, I guess, kind of, I'm going to take that from the side.
Okay.
Because I sort of see our food system, there are all these problems with it. There are all these like really, really big freaking problems with it. But it also is kind of amazing,
Hmm.
right? And there are opportunities to, I would say, undo those problems. And I think in the same way that our population is, maybe not as aggressively as we need to, but is focusing on climate change, right? Agriculture is a part of that. Industrial agriculture is a part of that. And we all still need to eat, right? And so, I was thinking about this, and this seems like an opportune moment, but you had teased this. I was driving up to the mountains with my family for a vacation, and we stopped off to get gas. And in the gas station, I saw a bag of Mexican street corn flavored Cheetos, so elote flavored Cheetos. And I'm a sucker for Cheetos, and I'm a sucker for elote. And like, yes, like we do everything that Stir does is organic, and or kind of best practice to the best of our ability. And I don't know, Cheeto, they're delicious. Like I also, as someone who is trained as a chef, I still have a love and appreciation for white flour and white sugar. I don't develop with MSG, but I do like MSG, and it's delicious, right? It tickles your brain in the right spot. And so I said to my wife, I was looking at this, like neon green, I think it was, bag. I was like, you realize that this is the pinnacle of civilization right here? And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no. It's like, just hear me out. I said, think about all of the technology that had to go, all of the resources that had to go into making this bag. And so we think of, first off, all the technology that was required to grow the corn, the combines, the chemical inputs, right? The supply chains that required it to get processed, brought to market. Okay. We have, and that's just the corn and the technology to puff the corn
Right.
into the Cheeto shape. Then you have the flavorings, right? And so we're taking something that cheese, which has been around for thousands of years, and now we're engineering it into these cheese powders that have low moisture levels that can survive for years, right? And still deliver a really intense, impactful flavor, right? Then you have the packaging, the fact that they've been flushed with inert gas, the fact that you have this foil that is basically impermeable, right? To keep this product fresh for probably years, right? And the fact that the metal had to be mined from somewhere and shipped and then embedded into plastic and into a film, and and all of that. And then finally you have the flavor itself, right? That there is a team on the Cheetos marketing team, right? On their brand team, that I'm sure put together focus groups and did sensory tests and all these different modes of consumer engagement. The fact that we have 70 years or so of consumer engagement, right, as an evolving industry,
Mm-hmm.
to get a product that scratches the itch in my lizard brain so perfectly that I had them a few months ago, and I'm still talking to you right now about what an impressive product it is, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's like, that feels like our food system. What's in a lot of ways amazing about it, right? All these complex systems come together, okay, to produce this product of dubious nutritional value, but like but it's delicious, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then, like, so that in some ways, like everything that's amazing, it's also everything that's wrong with the system, right? It's like it's all of it all in one.
Yeah.
And you know, to answer your question, like what do I see as maybe the flip side of that, right? And that's where I think we go into regenerative agriculture, right?
Right.
Which I've likened the food system knowledge and understanding, and even the food movement, sort of like computer computer technology and information technology, and the way that system has evolved. So, you know, in the 1940s, you had computers that took up the entire size of a room, right? And there are limited access to people. Very few people even knew they existed,
Right.
right? To where we are today, where you and I have phones in our pocket, maybe even watches on our wrists that have more computing power than what sent the Apollo astronauts to the moon,
Right.
right? And it's ubiquitous. Okay. But it took all that time to get there. And now it's, you know, spinning, 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 right? If you think about food system and food system, just sort of philosophy and organic agriculture and all that, you know, even 30 years ago, it was super niche,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think people thought of you know, little natural markets that had some wilted carrots and, you know, some other stuff that you like was of questionable deliciousness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now we have, I mean, Walmart is the largest seller of organic produce in the country. Actually, I think it's Costco now, but
Mm-hmm.
Walmart is certainly a close second. Um, we have an industry that allows us, you know, Expo West, right? Before the pandemic, there were 87,000 people
Yep.
that came to that show, right? That's huge. Um, Even last year, I think it was in the 70s.
Sure.
You know, so we have this huge industry now, and this industry gets to be the tip of the spear. We are the leaders, right? We're the
Mm-hmm.
ones who get to call the change, develop the change. And so, you know, when I say regenerative agriculture, right, and just to help there, it's a challenging term because it doesn't have a clear definition,
Mm.
and we definitely don't have time to get into all that right now. But just for the sake of people listening, if we want to define the term as an agricultural process that creates soil health, that regenerates, right? That makes the soil more fertile than it was before the process started, so that every generation of plants builds greater soil fertility and soil resiliency, right?
Like crop rotation with certain crop like pulses that fix the nitrogen in the soil, things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the challenge, right? One of the challenges is that there is no clear definition of it right now. So it's becoming something that is being greenwashed. Um, the Their standard isn't perfect, but I think the folks at Rodale who are doing the regenerative organic certification, I think in theory they have it right. At the very least, that like it seems disingenuous to call something regenerative if it's not also organic, if it's not also actively aiding in soil health, if it's not measurable in that way. Um, but we as an industry have the opportunity um, to help at its core build soil fertility, but like that's hard to sort of sell to a consumer, right? And that's one of the challenges. Like this stuff is it's like kind of sexy but not really sexy, and consumers just want cheap food that tastes good. Americans by and large, we want food that's sweet, cheap, and lasts forever.
Mm-hmm.
um, And a lot of these farming practices in some ways are antithetical to that.
Right.
So getting into what we as, food brands or sort of advocates or people at the tip of the spear, right? Like, and again, just to take half a step back, when we say, we're talking about like organic was niche, 30 years ago. There are now organic ingredient vendors of all sizes, right, that are providing the largest companies in the country, in the world, right, with sufficient product for organic. So in that way, we've come a long way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still a very small portion. It is the fastest growing portion. The big food companies know that it's the fastest growing portion. The challenge is that they're so entrenched in the way they do things that it takes a long time for them to make reasonable changes by and large, right? I kind of, and most of the change that they make is an innovation they make is through acquisition. So it's kind of like a dinosaur trying to evolve by eating a mammal, right? It's just, they're never going to be the mammal and like the comet's coming. So one of the ways that I like to think about this is when I'm working, and I work with I work with mostly young brands.
Mm-hmm.
I do it intentionally. I think it's fun. I think we can move fast. I think we can get really creative. Um, but they also have the flexibility, right, to make these decisions early on. So if you're starting a brand, okay, I would say think about where you want to be in a perfect world. So every client of mine, I say I have 4 questions for them. Okay, what are those 4 questions? All right, can you make it? Can you make money with it? Do people want it? What is your impact?
Mm-hmm.
That 4th one is a relative. It's one I've been thinking about for a while. It's one that I started asking out loud maybe about a year or so ago. And my wife was like, "You realize you've devoted your entire professional career to like impact, and you're not actually sort of helping push that conversation forward with the brands you work with."
Hmm.
I was like, my wife is a very smart woman, and I was like, shoot, yeah, you're right. All right, so so let's dig into that 4th one, right? And those first 3 are super important, right? But that 4th one is the one that gets easily overlooked.
Yeah.
Think about your supply chain early on. If you are launching and you're self-funding, good for you, right? Make sure you're capitalized efficiently. But even beyond that, it's going to be a lot easier for you to start as an organic brand and bake that into your DNA than it is a few years in. Let's say now you're a 1 million, a $5 million brand, a $10 million brand, right? You're making sales, you got good distribution, you're taking investor money because you want to grow to that next level, right? Do you think an investor is going to say, well, I know you want to do organic, and that's great, but it's gonna, give us a substantial hit on your margin to do that. And we're investing in you so that we can get our exit, right? We don't believe that you should be doing this to the brand because it's going to cost us money, right? And not every investor is like that, but most are. And but if you're already thinking about organic, for example, then start with it, right? Think about if you're doing something new and unique, you may have to build your own supply chain. I have one brand that is a protein bar that I'm working with, and we've had to go to farmers to find a very specific type of ingredient. I don't know if I can say more than that, so I'd love to because it's a really cool product, but I don't want to get in trouble.
Sure.
We've had to go to farmers who are growing this one product to be able to say, can you process this for us, right? And the thing is, the more the more brand owners, whether mature brand owners or entrepreneurs, are going further up the supply chain to look for these solutions, the more the farmers are going to say, oh, wait a minute, there's a market for this. Oh, the processors are going to say, oh, there's a market for this.
Right.
Right. And then once there's a market for it, there's what they call the network effect. The more people who get in, the more people, the more powerful the network gets. And so now, even if I had to do the legwork to get IQF fire roasted peppers, red peppers, right? Or regeneratively grown red peppers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that I know there's a critical mass of it, the processor can start selling it to other people. The farmer knows that there's more of it, right? So it's, in a lot of ways, it's grassroots, which is really, really daunting when we're talking about, a multi-bazillion dollar agricultural industrial industry complex, whatever you want to call it, right? That has teams of lobbyists and lawyers making sure that it's business as usual. It's uphill. Like I can't. I don't think it's reasonable to say that it's not. And I got into this industry because I got into this industry for a lot of reasons. One is I love food, right? I think we have an amazing industry because it's full of thoughtful, thought-provoking, differently thinking people, right? Who are trying to change the food system, even if they don't necessarily, or even if they're not consciously trying to change the food system, right? And there's some people who are absolutely on the front lines, warriors trying to make it happen. This is an industry that, I've thought about, like, where would I go if I left? Like, I have no idea. I mean, I don't know of another industry where I really want to, like, hang out with my colleagues and my peers pretty much across the board, right? I mean, maybe it would be like the music industry or something like that. I don't know, but like I only hear horror stories. So I don't know. Food and natural foods in particular is where it's at.
Yeah.
So harnessing that, harnessing community. If you want to create something, if you want to find a new resource, an agricultural resource, there's always opportunities for it. Whether it's, every specialty crop has a trade marketing association associated with it. And you call them up and they're always happy to put you in touch with sour cherry farmers or date farmers or grass-fed cattle or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And then the other thing is thinking about supply chain resiliency. Okay. So a lot of the products that we make, right, they come from all over the world. It's fine. You know, is it the best thing in the world for carbon footprint? Blah blah blah. No, but like it's the world we live in and it's the world we function. However, um, there are often opportunities to source locally. And when I say local, I just mean within the United States, right? Like domestically, or even even this hemisphere, right? As opposed to getting stuff shipped from Europe or Asia or places like that. And it's funny because oftentimes people say, well, it's more expensive to get it sourced locally. And this goes back to externalities, right? And then it also goes back to like actual dollars and cents. So maybe your ashwagandha is cheaper if it's coming from, per pound if it's coming from India. Okay. But let's think about what's happened over the past few years since during and since the pandemic. We've had supply chain disruptions, massive, in all industries. We've had crazy fluctuations in the cost of freight, right? So just coupling those two pieces together. So, and I'm just making up prices right now.
Right. Yeah.
But like, maybe the ashwagandha from India that I'm getting is $15 a pound, and the stuff that I'm getting domestically is $22 a pound. Okay. But when all is said and done, once I'm taking into account waiting for delivery and the impact that could have on my production, once I take into account the fact that a shipping container might cost me $20,000 now, right, or more, suddenly, fine, it becomes $21 a pound from India as opposed to $22 a pound from the United States.
Sure.
And for me, the calculus becomes: would I rather support an American farmer, a resilient supply chain, lower my carbon footprint, have that story to tell to a consumer, right? Or get some sort of commodity. I don't really think it was commodity ashwagandha, but you know what I mean. But get a product from the other side of the world that has the added stress of the vagaries of the current global marketplace.
Sure. Well, I want to switch gears, and since you were talking about ashwagandha, it seems like a nice little jump off. I want to talk about functional food and beverage, because that's one of the biggest trends in product development that I'm seeing, possibly that you were seeing as well. And I wanted to get your take on what brands need to know about innovating with functional ingredients.
Sure. So what I'd say is let's just can we define some terms first?
Yes, please.
For folks. So there are a lot of different categories of functional ingredients. At its core, functional ingredients are those ingredients that, I mean, you're using a term to define a term, but they add a function to the food. So we can think of, the classic example are alkaloids, which are chemicals of a plant origin that have a physiological effect on humans. So caffeine, theobromine in chocolate, quinine, morphine, strychnine. So like they're not all hunky dory, but they all do have a physiological effect. There's mushrooms, which have been around for thousands of years and are obviously very popular right now. Adaptogens, which we'll talk about, and again, to define our terms, they're obviously very buzzy. They're a special class of herbs that help the body adapt to defend against stress. So they work systematically in the body by adapting their function according to a body's specific needs, which means they can help your body find homeostasis bidirectionally. So they can rev you up or slow you down depending on what your body's signals are firing, or how your body's signals are firing. Then we have, Chinese herbs and Ayurveda, which are obviously very different traditions, but sort of are based in kind of holistic medical systems. from India and China, respectively, and cannabinoids, which are obviously not quite as buzzy as they were a few years ago, but THC and CBD are kind of the biggest two, and then there is CBG, CBN, THCV, THCA. There are hundreds of them, and we could have hours and hours of talks on just those. So I would say the biggest and buzziest right now are mushrooms and adaptogens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when formulating with them, there are a few things to think about. One is the application. So actually, I'll even step back. One is efficacy. How much do you need of this product for an efficacious dose, right? So we've all had a cup of coffee. I'd say almost everyone listening has had a cup of coffee or a cup of tea before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know that different bodies have different sensitivities, and you can build up tolerances and the like. But caffeine is one of those functional ingredients that you take it and you immediately or almost instantaneously feel its effects.
Yeah.
Adaptogens and mushrooms are trickier, right? Because it generally takes a couple of weeks for them to build up in your system to a level where you begin to feel the effects. And maybe it's even a month, right? So is this an application where you're that you're going to use on a daily basis, or on a frequent enough basis to generate efficacy in your consumer? Or is it just really expensive pixie dust?
Right.
So if it is the former, and I hope it's the former for everyone, because these can be really great ingredients. And I say thank you to our sponsor, right? But they need to be put into products where people are actually going to use them the right way. So don't be disingenuous with your consumer. If it's something that they're only going to have once in a while, is that the best use of it? I mean, or is it just a cash grab?
Right.
Because, and this happened with CBD, I think in particular, where a lot of people in 2018, 2019, they were putting CBD into everything, and a lot of people either weren't validating their certificates of analysis, their COAs, that sort of the test and the test results that said this is how much CBD is actually in this product, or they were mishandling the CBD in a way that it degraded. So, CBD is photosensitive. People were putting it into clear plastic bottles and CBD water. It would sit on a shelf in a gas station. People would open it up, they would take it, and there would be no effect. And this stuff is a scam, right? Well, maybe the stuff that you put in the bottle to begin with was good, but it was handled in such a way that by the time it got to consumer, there was nothing left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about it in those ways, one level down, how does this stuff taste? A lot of it is really bitter or sour or unpleasant. So how are you working with flavors in a complementary way, that you don't either accentuate the unpleasant flavors, or you create conflicting flavors so that you launch a product that has sort of a toothpaste and orange juice kind of combination, where they both taste fine together, right? But when you put them together, there's that that butting of heads.
Right.
And so there's that. And then the last is making sure that you're using a product that, and this goes a little bit back to efficacy, but a product that can, how do I say it? That basically plays nice with the process. So if you're making a beverage, right, something that is water soluble or water suspendable or doesn't interact with the lining on your aluminum can, right? Thinking about all those different potentials, again, so that when you get the product to the consumer, it's doing the thing that it said that it's supposed to do. And then ultimately, and this goes back to the tying up a loose end from the CBD, right? Ultimately, what happened there was you had a lot of consumers that said, "Oh, this stuff is bogus, and it's a scam," right? And it put off a lot of it sort of shut down a market in some ways before it even started, or it created it decreased the size of a market before it really even got to fully take off.
Sure.
And so if these products, if these ingredients actually do have the ability to help consumers, then let's use them in a way that it doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? That it basically, it doesn't put off consumers,
Right.
so that they disillusion. That's the word I'm looking for. So it doesn't disillusion consumers.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so tying that back to our earlier conversation, how does the functional food trend fit into a sustainable food system?
Yeah. So I think that goes back to a little bit to what I was thinking, what I was talking about with, um, locally sourced ashwagandha, right?
Right.
That if we think about um, a lot of these um, functional ingredients have a halo. They may have been sourced from the four corners of the earth, and they have a halo of exoticism,
Mm-hmm.
right, around them. But they're often domestic alternatives or domestic equivalents, not even alternatives, right? I mean, you're not necessarily growing Panax ginseng in the United States, but there is ginseng that's grown in North America,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Looking at sourcing these products domestically, looking at sourcing them organically. The more vendors have requests for organic, the more likely they are to carry organic. And there's almost always someone who has organic. You just have to dig for it. And sometimes there are supply chain constraints, and if you want something, you just need to. It's not always presented to you on a silver platter. You have to dig for it. And we at Stir do a lot of that. We really. It's one of the reasons why I like going to a lot of the shows, because we wind up meeting the more obscure vendors who we wouldn't necessarily find from some of our more traditional searches. Yeah, I mean, besides that, I think it ties in not just to the functional ingredient, but um, the entire product as a whole, right? So if most brands are selling functional foods based off of a health and wellness claim, right? Or health and wellness, maybe not a claim outright, but a perception, certainly. I think the exception is probably caffeine. People just, no one would call Red Bull a health food, but it certainly is functional,
Right.
right? Um, as you're formulating, where can you make those smarter choices from a sustainability standpoint, from an impact standpoint? Where can you get organic mushrooms? And those are admittedly hard to find organic, domestically grown mushroom extracts. The best ones right now come from China. And so you have to weigh that, right? But then if it's not just mushroom in your bar or in your beverage or in your, whatever, right? Your coffee. How are the other ingredients being sourced? Are we making sure that farmers are being paid and treated well? Are we making sure that all the stakeholders up and down the supply chain are being accounted for and being thought of? And I know this isn't a functional food example, but I want to kind of give a really, what I think is a really great example, and shout out to a client of mine. So it's a brand called Artisan Tropic. They make, up until recently, they've made cassava and plantain chips. They have, and we're launching a plantain based cracker for them at Expo East in a couple of weeks. They said, okay, wait a minute. They're a Colombian family. They're based in the United States, but they said, okay, how do we do this in a way that sort of both celebrates what we know, celebrates our culture. So they really are thinking holistically about all of it, right? And creates a superlative product for people and planet. And so, they're sourcing all of their yucca and all of their, or cassava, right? Same thing, but all of their cassava and plantains are sourced from their farm. And they have a farm in Colombia. It's a biodynamic, regeneratively sourced farm. I mean, if you see videos of this place, it looks like a paradise. But then with this cracker, they said, we're making our plantain flour. We're making it in there, in an SQF rated facility in Colombia. But we can't get everything from our own farm. So now let's look through the supply chain. Let's figure out what else we need. But if we can source directly from farmers, that's great. And they've done that in a couple of cases, but they had to we went to other vendors who kind of aggregate, right? And but they've been vetted, and we know that maybe they're employee-owned companies, they're sourcing ethically, they're paying farmers well, they're thinking about their carbon footprint and offsets, right? So that at the end of the day, even though not everything is perfect, right? It still is really thoughtful, so that all the way down, every decision they've made in launching this new cracker, right, has been, yes, it's, can we make money at it? Do people want it? But then it's, what is our impact, right? And it's part of their brand's DNA of, we have regeneratively sourced plantains and plantain flour, right? And this becomes a real differentiator, and their products are delicious, right? Like, so it's like it's that whole thing.
So I do want to kind of ask you to help me navigate this dichotomy of, earlier you said the majority of people want food that is cheap, sweet, and shelf stable. But you're also saying for brands to truly make a difference and create a more sustainable and just more responsible food system.
Yeah.
We're sourcing organic, we're sourcing fair trade. We're making sure that there's a lot of premium that comes with that. So, and there's a very small percentage of consumers who do eat that way, who will pay more for that. So how do we create this demand? How can we scale this impact when the price isn't there and we're in a very economically challenged environment?
I mean, the short answer is I wish I knew. The longer answer is it trickles down. So there are ways to make decisions when you're sourcing that are best practice, and there are ways that are almost best practice, right? One of the things that I found over and over again at food companies, especially larger food companies, is they say, well, we need to squeeze out more margin from a product. Okay. But the sales team doesn't say, well, we'll lower our sales budget. And the marketing team doesn't say, let's lower the marketing budget. They always say, let's lower the cost of the food. Let's lower the cost of the ingredients. And then it becomes incumbent on the developers and the scientists who are optimizing, quote unquote, these products to race towards the bottom. There's this kind of famous story about DiGiorno, how like some of the DiGiorno team at Nestle years ago, they went and they're like, you know what, we're gonna use the original formula and make a DiGiorno pizza crust. And they're like, they made it. They're like, this is amazing. And then they like compared it to what they make now, and they're like, this is gross, right? And I don't know that they necessarily said that, but there is, it's this idea. A chef of mine called it the law of incremental crappiness, and the idea is if you cut a corner, if there are 10 steps in a project, and you cut a corner between 1 and 2 and leave it all alone, you're not really going to see a difference. But if you cut a corner between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 all the way down, by the time you've cut that corner at step 9 and 10, you have a substantially crappier product.
Right.
Right. And so this doesn't necessarily answer the question, but I think that obviously a brand doesn't get anywhere if you don't market and sell. But a brand also, I mean, I guess a brand can get somewhere if you give the world a crappy product. I mean, I don't want to name names. I just saw some stuff that was launched recently that was like, I was gobsmacked by.
I'm going to need you to tell me that offline.
Okay. Yeah, no, I will. I mean, I if you want, I can say it now.
That's okay. We'll wait.
Okay. All right. But like, I think there is this idea that like we appeal to, because consumers always say we don't want sweet, we don't want sugar, we don't want salt, we don't want fat. And then as a developer, when you take that out, the consumer says, why doesn't this taste good? Right. So we've been accustomed, and our taste buds have grown accustomed to these sensations and these, these sort of the way the synapses fire in our brain, right, and the endorphin release. And so I think that there are, if you approach product development from thinking about it as food, right, as something that is nurturing, as something that is giving, as something that is delicious, right? And delicious doesn't have to be cloyingly sweet. I mean, sure, like I said, those Cheetos were delicious, right? But like, I'm not going to eat them every day, and I know people do. I think a lot of it, and I know I'm all over the place because this is like it's a really complicated question that you're asking, right? And yeah. I'm like digging into my brain to like give you a beautiful solution with a bow on it, and I can't.
Does it exist? I mean, we don't really. Yeah.
But I guess what I'll sort of end on is that going back to this idea that we're the tip of the spear, right? And that even if that's not the way, even if consumers want cheap, sweet, and to last forever, right? All of the growth in the industry is coming from natural and organic, which to me means that it's not, people aren't being priced out, right? That they are finding ways to make these selections. Again, if Walmart and Costco are number 1 and 2 or number 2 and 1, right? It means that the quote unquote average consumer is paying attention to this stuff. And so for that, I'm optimistic, right? That our industry continues to push the envelope. Our industry has a mandate and has a requirement, to keep on pushing, because then it goes from being fringe to being part of the everyday conversation, right? And once it's in the everyday conversation, once it's part of the dialogue, once it's taken for granted, right, that's when the change can be made, because the momentum starts and the flywheel starts turning.
Yeah. Well, I think that was really a nice way to end this. Thank you so much. This was a lot of we covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
and yeah, I really appreciate all of your perspective and insights. And I also wanted to once again thank our sponsor, Applied Food Sciences, for the generous support of this episode of Well Fed by Food Entrepreneur. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. Until next time, we'll see you after Expo East.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. Thanks a lot.